Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Flyers, in which the Sharks have lost 4-2. So obviously a starkly different game than how their first matchup went between these two teams, in which the Sharks managed to win 6-1. And this game started off quite poorly for the Sharks. For the first 3 minutes, it was all Flyers, helped by an early power play of theirs, and they managed to get the first goal of the game from Aube-Kubel on said power play to make it 1-0 Flyers. But from that point on, the Sharks, for basically the rest of the first period, controlled the pace to the point where the Flyers didn't have a shot for close to the next 15 or so minutes. The Sharks would get one goal during that time frame from Joel Shellman, and it would be a tied game at 1 going into the second period. So it looked like this was one the Sharks could have maybe had a chance in, but the second period, it began to get away from them. It would be goals from both Kevin Hayes as well as Travis Konecny to make it 3-1 Flyers at the end of 40 minutes. Come third period, the Flyers would expand that lead with a second goal from Kevin Hayes to make it 4-1 before Gregor would make it at least somewhat interesting with his second of the year to make it 4-2, but that would be the score the game would end with, and the Sharks would lose once again here, getting on a pretty big losing streak, but then again, not a huge surprise after having been a bit of sellers at the deadline just yesterday. First thing to talk about would be Dell, as he gets the start here tonight. Not too much of a surprise after Jones had a not so great game against the Islanders, but Dell had a pretty bad game tonight, actually. I would say the only goal he probably, didn't have much of a chance on at all was Hayes' first, coming off of a 2-on-1. But this Aube-Kubel one early in the game is one that he just is unable to control the rebound on, that allows Van Riemsdyk to pass it over to Aube-Kubel. The Konecny one is one that it's a tough place because Konecny is obviously shooting from a pretty advantageous area, but still it's one that sneaks through the 5-hole of Dell, one you want to see him be able to make the save on. And of course the worst of the night being Hayes' second one that just somehow managed to squeak through Dell. So this was a game that was possible with good goaltending that the Sharks could have been a bit more competitive in. Maybe an overtime would have been in the cards, but not so great game for Dell, which makes me think that Jones should get the next start for the Sharks coming up on Thursday. Next to talk about would be Couture, as he actually returned for tonight's game, which was somewhat of a surprise. Now, we knew he was coming on this road trip, this 4-game road trip that brought the Sharks through New York and ended up here in Philadelphia, but I believed it was, at least said that Couture wouldn't play on that road trip and he would likely be back for the first game back at home, but he ends up suiting up for this one. And he looked okay. He found himself in, classic Couture situations. He found himself in the right place at the right time a lot of times. He had probably 3 or 4 very good chances that he just was unable to bury time and time again. However, he did also look somewhat sluggish, especially near the end of the game. And that's not really too much of a surprise when you miss about 2 months of hockey. You're probably going to come out pretty sluggish, and of course, since the Sharks aren't playing for all that much on the season, you're also not going to be giving it your all necessarily 100% of the time. And so it was a pretty good game from Couture, a good first game back, and hopefully we can see him begin to bury some of those chances that he did have tonight that he was unable to convert on. And finally, I'll talk about Stefan Noesen. So as I said, the Sharks were sellers at the deadline. They got rid of Marleau, and most importantly, they got rid of Barclay Goodrow. Now, Noesen is not necessarily someone who the Sharks play on the penalty kill, but he does fill a similar role as Goodrow in terms of offensively, where he's someone who can play on the third and fourth line, and you'd probably want on the third and fourth line, but he has flexed up a bit to the second and sometimes in the second line at times this season when the Sharks have been at their worst due to injuries. And Noesen was, of course, the player the Sharks picked up on waivers. He's actually looked quite good for the Sharks this season. He made up that very strong fourth line that the Sharks were able to run with prior to all the injuries that they ran into, that consisted of him, Shellman, and Melker Karlsson. And so at the end of this season, when Noesen's contract is up, considering he was a player who actually got waived, and I doubt he can get a super competitive contract with most of the teams in the NHL, I would probably like to see the Sharks actually re-sign him. He can be a solid fourth liner. He could potentially be a third liner, as we've seen this season and as I've said. And he's probably someone who would request a maximum of $1 million, if even that. So he could be a solid depth forward, which, as I said, with the Sharks trading Goodrow, the Sharks will likely need going into next season, and Nason could be the first in that area. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action as they will face off against the New Jersey Devils once again on Thursday. It was only quite recently where they played off against the Devils, actually about a week ago from when they'll play the Devils again on Thursday. And it was a close game, but they ended up losing that one 2-1, and we'll see if they can put up a better performance there. Class dismissed.